Hello everyone, my name is David Lutchford and welcome to lesson 62 of my Ancient Greek course. In today's lesson we are going to be learning about the aorist tense, and in particular we're going to be covering the weak aorist and the strong aorist in the indicative active. Now I shall explain what the terms weak aorist and strong aorist mean a little bit later on, and I'll also explain what the term aorist means in general, as soon as we have taken a look at my virtual shelves. Because if we do that, we shall see that my newest shelves are now full, thanks to Francesco Idiomorotatos and Roller 52 filling up the final shelves there. So thank you very much, Francesco Idiomorotatos and Roller 52, for supporting my channel, for continuing to support my channel, in fact. Now, the name Idiomorotatos is interesting because it's a combination of two Greek words, namely idios, which is a 2-1-2 adjective that declines like makros, and idios means private, okay? And moros, which means stupid or foolish. So we've got idios and we've got moros, and then we've also got the ending tatos, which makes an adjective into a superlative, as you know. So this is literally very private and stupid or foolish. That's the meaning of the name, okay? I'm not saying the person is that. I'm sure that this individual, and I know, in fact, judging by the quality of his messages, that he is an incredibly intelligent individual, but his name literally means very or most private and stupid, because we've got idios, which is private, and moros, which is stupid or foolish, in the superlative. Now, that adjective idios does give us our word idiot. However, in ancient Greek, it just meant private. Idios is used to mean anything that's private, that's not a public affair. However, over time, that word picked up the meaning of somebody that's not experienced in any profession, and that came to mean eventually a person that was unintelligent. And that's how we get our term idiot. But in ancient Greek, idios just meant not public, i.e. private. Now, the other thing I need to note is that I have filled the shelf space that we had here with two busts, one of Aphrodite and one of Athena. The one of Aphrodite was thanks to the suggestion of Crown, who commented with that recommendation. So thank you very much, Crown, for suggesting the bust of Aphrodite. I've added Athena as well, so we have two goddesses on this shelf, the goddess of love and the goddess of wisdom, respectively. Now, Aphrodite in ancient Greek would be Aphrodite, and it's a 1A noun, like Boer. Athena in Attic Greek would be Athena, and it's a 1B noun, like Cora. However, the earlier version of Athena's name in Homer is Athena, and that's why you sometimes see it written as Athene rather than Athena. This version is also the version that's used in Ionic Greek, but Attic Greek, which is what we're focusing on, has Athena instead. Now, some other people have also generously supported my channel recently, namely Caroline, Sweet Caroline, Aposirthes. In addition, Jenny Wren and Ken have recently supported my channel once again, and we also have Dan supporting my channel for the very first time, like Aposirthes. So Aposirthes and Dan, thank you very much for supporting my channel for the first time, and welcome to the Amphori Club. And Caroline, Jenny Wren and Ken, thank you very much for continuing to support my channel. Finally, I must also say thank you to Micah for continuing to support my channel. I greatly appreciate it. And Micah's Amphori are the first three on this newest set of shelves that I have here, which is kind of a wicker style set of shelves. I've gone for some lighter colours, okay? Let's get some positive vibes going with these lighter colours. Although I'm currently wearing a black shirt, I usually wear black. That's giving off sad vibes, you know, it's giving off doom and gloom vibes. But the shelves are light, they're giving us hope, okay? And I need that right now because I'm unwell, I'm ill, okay? I've contracted Freshers' flu, as it is called. And therefore, I might sound a bit congested. I'm sorry about that, if so. Anyway, I've got this new light shelf and this new light shelf. This one has been, I'm calling it a shelf. It's a bookcase. I've got this new light bookcase and this new light bookcase, and this one has been fully filled already. If you would like to add a virtual amphora or virtual amphorae to my amphorae case, then you can do so at the link in the description below while the shelf space remains. Now, before we move on to the aorist tense, I do want to say a huge thank you to absolutely everyone who has generously supported my channel in the past. I have an astonishing collection of virtual amphorae, which is enough to blow anybody's mind, you know. I think we're all in awe of these incredible amphorae. We have such a variety, you know, and if you have any suggestions for future shelf ideas, let me know, because we do have this variety of shelving and variety of amphorae. So you can customize your own amphora as you please within the limits of what is polite and acceptable. But tell me, how should I customize my shelves, you know? How should I design the next shelf? What kind of shelf should I go for next? I keep saying shelf, I mean bookcase. You know what I mean. Anyway, there is one thing I need to tell you, as usual, about one of these past shelves. The one I have in mind here is this one, because you'll see that on our seasonal shelf, we have two fresh items, namely a Windows XP sticker and a statue of a lion. Now, why do you have those, I hear you ask? Well, kind viewer, to answer your question, we have a lion because today, the 25th of October, is Katy Perry's birthday. And Katy Perry sang the song Roar. You remember the song Roar? Roar is the sound a lion makes, right? And therefore we've got a lion to celebrate Katy Perry's birthday. Happy birthday, Katy. I hope you have a good one. Big shout out. Now, in addition, we also have the Windows XP sticker because a bit later on, after the birth of Katy Perry, which was in 1984, on the 25th of October 2001, so this day 24 years ago, Windows XP was released. There you go. So we not only had the birth of Katy Perry on the 25th of October, but also the release of Windows XP. Happy birthday, Windows XP. Does anyone still use Windows XP? Let me know in the comments if you're watching this video on a Windows XP machine. There's not many of those out there, but some stuff still runs it, like ATMs and tills, I think, sometimes still use Windows XP. You sometimes see an error message come up on one of them and it's got Windows XP there and it's nostalgic. You know what else is nostalgic associated with Windows XP? This image. Do you remember this background? It was the default background on Windows XP machines. That beautiful nostalgic hill. But wait, there's somebody in the distance. Who's that coming over the hill? Oh my goodness. It's Katy Perry. Happy birthday, Katy Perry. There you go. This image symbolises what we're celebrating today, the 25th of October, namely Katy Perry's birthday and the birthday or release day of Windows XP. Katy seems to be missing an elbow and a bit of midriff, but I can fix that and it will be like nothing ever happened. There we go. Let's go on. Thank you all so much for supporting my channel. We have so many shelves at this point that it takes a while to get through them all, you know, but I'll feel rude for tapping through them rapidly. You know, I already go through them quite quickly, so I'll feel insensitive and rude if I like spam the arrow key. So that's why I do want to acknowledge how wonderful all of you are. And everyone that likes my videos is also wonderful. And so are all of the commenters and subscribers, okay? So please do those things too. With that said, let's talk about the aorist tense. That's a weird looking word, right? Aorist. That's how it's pronounced, by the way. Aorist. It's spelled aorist, but we say aorist. Aorist. So, the aorist tense is used for complete actions in the past, and it can therefore be translated as I X'd, where X is an action, or the equivalent. The reason I say or the equivalent is because we don't always say IED in English. For instance, we do say it when it comes to the verb to walk. We say I walked, okay? But we don't say it when it comes to the verb to swim. We don't say I swimmed, we say I swam. So the aorist is the Greek equivalent of that simple past tense, a complete action in the past, which we typically translate as IED, I X'd. So for instance, I walked. But if we don't use the ED form in English, then we use the equivalent. So if we had swim in the aorist, we would say swam. Okay? That's what the aorist is used for. And this is once again in the indicative active. So in the indicative mood, the mood where a verb is indicating the occurrence of an action, and in the active voice, that is where the subject did the action of the verb. I say did here because the aorist is in the past. Now, contrast the aorist with the imperfect. The imperfect tense is used for incomplete or habitual actions in the past. So actions that somebody was doing or used to do, whereas the aorist is used for complete actions in the past. So actions that somebody did. Another way of characterizing this distinction is the imperfect is used for an ongoing action in the past or a process in the past, while the aorist is used for a finished action in the past, a complete, one-time, done action. It's all done, it was successful, it's ended, that's it. Whereas the imperfect is more of a process. So you can think about it as process versus finished action, if you prefer. With the imperfect being for a process in the past, the aorist being for a finished action in the past. To distinguish between them, you need to ask, can the action be interrupted? If it can, then it's going to be in the imperfect. If it can't, then it's going to be in the aorist, when we're speaking about past actions. Because if you say, I walked to the park, that means you got there. You were successful. You reached the park. But if you say, I was walking to the park, you can interrupt that action. I was walking to the park when a UFO smashed into the ground in front of me and hospitalized me. I shouldn't say that. That's a really gruesome example. A UFO smashed into the ground in front of me and then changed my course of action because I met an alien and we then went to Costa together and enjoyed a nice hot chocolate. There you go. So if you say I was doing it, that's capable of being interrupted. If you say I did it, that will be an aorist action. that is finished, it's complete, it's done. Okay? All good. So, I've put a few examples of what would be aorist verbs in Greek here, but in English to illustrate. So, for instance, I stopped, I helped, I killed, I swam, I taught, and I went. So you can see that we don't say swimmed, we don't say teached, we don't say goed. These are three that we don't use that ed form for in English. But with a lot of verbs, we do just stick ed on the end to make it into a simple past tense verb, which in Greek is in the aorist tense. Okay? That's what the aorist tense is. Please do pause the video and note this information down. Okay, now I mentioned at the start that we're going to be focusing on the weak aorist and the strong aorist in the indicative active. So what do these terms mean? Because so far I've just talked about the aorist and explained what that means, but what about the weak aorist and the strong aorist? Well, there are two ways of forming the aorist. Most verbs form their aorist in just one of these two ways, but some verbs can form the aorist in either way. The two ways of forming the aorist are the weak aorist, or first aorist. It's the same thing, but there are two different labels for it. And secondly, the strong aorist, or second aorist. These are the two ways of forming the aorist, or you could call them two types of aorist. Both of them have the same meaning in terms of they're used for complete actions in the past. I exed, or the equivalent. But the difference is in terms of how the Greek is formed. Most verbs form their aorist in this way. Most verbs have a weak aorist, but some have what's called a strong aorist. It's just a different way of forming the aorist, okay? And I will tell you which ones form it in the strong way as opposed to the weak way. However, if I haven't mentioned that a verb forms its aorist in the strong way, then assume it will be weak, okay? Because most verbs do it in the weak way. There are some verbs that have either option available to them. They can either form their aorist in the weak way or in the strong way. But like I said, most verbs fall into the camp of forming their aorist in the weak way, but some do it in the strong way, and a few can do it in either way. Okay? Happy days. Before we go on, please do pause the video and ensure that you've got this information noted down. Now that you know that there are two different ways of forming the aorist, the weak aorist and the strong aorist, or first and second, I'm going to use the terms weak and strong. I can now start by telling you how to form the aorist in the weak aorist way. Or in other words, how the weak aorist is formed. To form the weak aorist, we standardly do the following. Step 1, we take the present stem of the verb. For example, the present stem of power is pow. We can get the present stem just by dropping the or, the omega, from the first person singular of the present indicative active. Secondly, we add sigma to the end of it, like we do in the future tense. So that would give us paus. Now this form that has sigma added is what we call the weak aorist stem. So paus is the weak aorist stem of the verb power. I mention that because knowing that will come in handy in the future, okay? Knowing that that's how we form what's called the weak aorist stem. It's also how we form the future stem because we add sigma to the end of the present stem to make the future. So paus could be, and it is in fact, the future stem of power as well. But in this context, it's the weak aorist stem. So far, to form the weak aorist, we take the present stem, e.g. pow, then we add sigma to the end of it. So we get paus. Thirdly, we add an epsilon to the start of it. This is the augment. So that would give us epaus. Okay? Now, we met the augment when we learned about the imperfect. All past tense indicative verbs have the augment at the start. Okay, so all of the Greek past tenses have the augment or the equivalent of an augment. Remember, we spoke about some equivalent ways of augmenting a verb last time. But standardly, we add epsilon to the start of the present stem for it to act as the augment. So far we've got epaus. And at this point, we're ready to add the weak aorist endings. So, step 4 is to add the following endings, which are a, us, en, amen, ate, un. Those are the 6 weak aorist person endings. So, if we do this with epaus, which is where we've got to with paor, the verb to stop, we would get the following. Epausa, meaning I stopped. Epausas, meaning you singular stopped. Epausen, meaning he, she, it stopped. Epausamen, meaning we stopped. Epausate, meaning you plural stopped. And epausan, meaning they stopped. So, that's how we standardly form the weak aorist. Now, I can give you some advice for learning these 6 new weak aorist person endings. One piece of advice I have for you is that the first one just has a single vowel as the ending, like we see in the present indicative active endings for verbs in or. There we just have or, we just have omega as the ending. So, the fact that this is just one vowel for the I form is the same as in the present, except here it's alpha. And we can remember that it's alpha because the weak aorist is obsessed with alpha, as you can see from these endings. There's alpha in almost all of them. The second tip I have for you is the second person singular ending, us, is very similar to, on the one hand, the present one that we know, which is ace, and also the imperfect one we know, which is s. Except, once again, we know that the weak aorist is obsessed with alpha, so instead of using a or e, it's going to use a, giving us us. Now, the third person singular one, n, that is exactly the same as in the imperfect, and the movable nu is the same as well, right? We know that the imperfect goes on sn, so the n is the same as in the imperfect. And the movable nu, of course, means that we'll only see that nu there if the next word begins in a vowel or diphthong, or if the verb is appearing at the end of the sentence. Otherwise, we could just see, for instance, epause. Now, the ending amen is very similar to omen, which we know from both the present and the imperfect, except, once again, because the weak aorist is obsessed with alpha, we have an alpha there. Now, ate is very similar to ete, which we know from both the present and the imperfect. Once again, though, the weak aorist is obsessed with alpha, and so we have ate rather than ete. Finally, with the un ending, this is similar to the imperfect they ending, which is on. That's also the imperfect I ending, but it's used in the they form too. Anyway, instead of on, we've got un, because the weak aorist is obsessed with alpha. So I hope those tips will help you to remember the 6 weak aorist indicative active person endings. With that said, please do pause the video and note down the information on the screen. Now, the next thing I need to tell you is that the usual stuff happens with the augment when we form the weak aorist. So, you learned about what happens with the augment in the imperfect video. If you haven't watched my lesson on the imperfect, make sure you've done that because I explain in more detail there exactly what happens with the augment when it comes to other verbs that are a bit trickier, like verbs with stems that begin with vowels. So, to specify what I mean, I've put, note that the usual stuff occurs with the augment, namely, 1. Stems that begin with vowels have their vowels lengthened instead. So instead of adding epsilon as the augment there, we just lengthen the vowel at the start. I can give you an example of this. So the verb akuor, which means I hear or I listen to. Now this verb akuor has the stem aku. That's the present stem of the verb, okay? So let's use aku to show how we would form the weak aorist of this verb. We would then add sigma to get akus. That would be the weak aorist stem of the verb. Now to put it into the weak aorist indicative, we need to augment it. But with a verb that's got a stem beginning with a vowel, we can't just add epsilon, we need to lengthen the vowel at the start, and alpha typically lengthens to eta. So alpha would lengthen to eta, giving us erkus. And if we add the I ending, we get erkusa, which would be I heard or I listened to. And then it will go erkusas, erkusen, erkusamen, etc. So, as usual, instead of having the epsilon added at the start, verbs with stems that begin with vowels have their vowels lengthened instead. Secondly, the augment typically gets added after a prefix of a compound verb. Here, to illustrate, I'm going to introduce you to the verb pempor. This is one I will put at the end of the video as one to learn. Pempor is the verb to send. So pempor is I send. Now, the verb ek pempor is a compound of pempor. And what do you think it would mean, given your knowledge of compound verbs and prefixes? It means I send out. Okay, if you ek pempor someone or something, you send it out. We know ek means out of. As a prefix, it can just be out. So ek pempor is send out. Now, if we wanted to put this into the weak aorist, it would be exe pempsa. Now, what's happened here is we've added the augment, the epsilon, after the prefix ek, but ek becomes x when it's followed by a vowel or a diphthong. So that's why we've got exe. And what's happened with the sigma? Well, as I shall talk about in just a moment, the usual stuff happens with sigma. So when we have pi plus sigma, it makes psi, as we found in the future tense. Do make sure you've watched my video on the future as well, because the same rules about the addition of sigma apply here too. But my point on this slide was that the usual stuff happens with the augment. In addition, as I was just mentioning, nearly all the usual stuff happens with the addition of sigma. So we learned about what happens when sigma gets added to the present stem of a verb, to the end of a present stem of a verb, in the video on the future tense. Now, nearly all of that applies here as well. And I'm going to state exactly which rules of those do apply here. It's all of them except one. So, note that nearly all of the usual stuff occurs with the sigma being added too. Namely, contract verbs lengthen the contract vowel when sigma is added. So, to illustrate, the verb poieor, I make or I do, in the weak aorist would be poiesa. That would be I made or I did. Okay? Now, you can see we've added the augment because the stem begins with a consonant, so we can just add epsilon as the augment, that's fine. And when we've added sigma, the epsilon has lengthened to eta. The contract vowel has lengthened. Okay? And then we've got the usual first person singular weak aorist ending. So apoiesa would be I made or I did. Just note that the contract vowels lengthen, so epsilon has gone to eta. The others lengthen as I've explained they do. Also, something else that applies here is certain consonants combine with sigma to form a new consonant. We saw that pempor goes to epempsa. That's because pi plus sigma makes psi, for example. So the rules about which consonants combine with sigma to make new consonants also apply here. Moreover, sigma still replaces the consonants delta, zeta, theta, and tau. The difference here is, with the future, we learned that verbs that have a stem ending in isd, iota zeta, don't have the sigma simply replace the zeta. But here that does happen. So nomisdor, the verb I think or I consider, becomes enomisa, I thought or I considered. The sigma has simply just replaced zeta. Nothing weird goes on with these verbs in isd when it comes to the weak aorist, unlike in the future. That's the one rule about the addition of sigma that doesn't apply in the weak aorist when it does in the future. Okay, so that's why I put nearly all the usual stuff happens. Now, verbs with stems in lambda, mu, nu, and rho do not add sigma, like they don't in the future. Instead, they just lengthen their stems before adding the weak aorist endings. Now, they lengthen their stems if possible. That won't always be possible. It's possible if you've got a short vowel in the stem that can turn into a diphthong. So, an example of where that is possible is with the verb menor. Menor means I stay or I remain. In the weak aorist, it is emena. So, we haven't added sigma here. Instead, we've lengthened the epsilon in the stem to a, the diphthong epsilon iota. And we have the augment as usual, that's fine. And then we have the weak aorist ending. So it'll go emena, emenas, emeinen, emeinamen, etc. With some verbs, we can't lengthen it. So, for instance, the verb apoktainor, I kill, there we can't lengthen ktain because it's already got a diphthong. So you would just say apektaina for I killed. You would just augment it and use the weak aorist endings. Now, with that said, I have put 10 weak aorist verbs on the screen for you to translate into English. Please do pause the video and do that now. Okay, I'm now going to reveal the answers and I'm just going to fly through them. If you have any questions about any of them, please do post them in the comments below. Etusan would be they sacrificed. Number 2, edulorsamen would be we enslaved. Number 3, enomisa would be I thought or I considered. 4, elusan would be they released. 5, porresate would be you plural were perplexed, or alternatively, you plural were at a loss. 6, typsen would be he, she, it struck or hit. 7, tersas would be you singular demanded, asked for or begged for. 8, epulaxamen would be we guarded. 9, eblepsate would be you plural looked at or just looked. And finally, number 10, epilersan would be they loved or they liked. Now, it should be clear what's happened with each of these verbs if you've learned the rules that I've already referred to, okay, about what happens when the augment's added, what happens when sigma is added, and if you've learned the weak aorist endings that I've listed. But if you have any questions, please do post them in the comments below. Okay, exercise 2 asks you to translate 10 English verbs into ancient Greek. All of these will require you to put a verb in the weak aorist. Please do pause the video and translate these English verbs into ancient Greek. Okay, to reveal the answers, number 1, I was amazed, would be taumasa. Number 2, we wrote, would be grapsamen. 3, he shouted, would be boersen. 4, you singular cried, would be kleisas. 5, they followed, would be kolutersan. 6, you plural buried, would be tapsate. 7, I committed adultery, would be moicheusa. 8, we punished, would be kolasamen. 9, she trusted, would be episteusen. And 10, I hated, would be emisersa. If you have any questions, please do post them in the comments below. But otherwise, let's now speak about how to form the aorist in the strong aorist way. Okay? So, we said there's 2 ways of forming the aorist. There is actually one more. We'll talk about that one later on. It's rarer though. You don't need to know about it just now. I'll talk about it in the next lesson, okay? But the 2 main ways are the weak aorist and the strong aorist. I said that the strong aorist, the second one, is less widely used. Fewer verbs on the whole have a strong aorist form, but you do still see it an awful lot. Okay, so you definitely need to know about it, 100%. Now, let's talk about how you form this strong aorist that some verbs have instead of a weak aorist then. To form the strong aorist, we do the following. Firstly, we take the strong aorist stem of the verb. Now, this is the crucial thing about the strong aorist. It doesn't use the present stem. Okay? The other tenses we've learned about all take the present stem and do something with it. That happens in the present, of course, and also in the future, and in the imperfect, and in the weak aorist. The strong aorist is strong, and it doesn't need any present stem. It's a strong, independent tense, and it doesn't need any present stem, okay? It's got its own stem. So, there is a special strong aorist stem for the verbs that have a strong aorist. And not every verb does, okay? So it's not like you've got to learn a different stem for every single verb. You've got to learn it just for the verbs that have a strong aorist. And soon, I shall list all of the verbs that we've met, the ones that we've learned, which have a strong aorist, okay? So don't worry, I've done that for you. You don't need to look them all up yourself. Anyway, I've put e.g. lub here. Lub is the strong aorist stem of lumbanor, the verb to take. Now, strong aorist stems are usually, but not always, a shorter version of the present stem. So the present stem of lumbanor, the verb I take, is lumban. The strong aorist stem is just lub. Okay? Then, the second step is we add the augment. We add an epsilon to the start of that strong aorist stem. So, that would give us el-lub in the case of lumbanor. Then, thirdly, we add the same set of endings as in the imperfect tense. Those endings are on, es, en, omen, ete, on. So if we use lumbanor as our example, that would give us the following. Elabon, that would be I took. Elabes, you singular took. Elaben, he, she, it took. Elabomen, we took. Elabete, you plural took. And elabon, again, they took. Now what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that the only visible difference between the strong aorist and the imperfect is which stem is used. The imperfect uses the present stem, but it also has an augment and the endings on, s, n, omen, eter, on. The strong aorist, however, uses the strong aorist stem. It uses this special stem, which is usually a shortened version of the present stem, and that is the case for all of the verbs that have a strong aorist. Namely, they will use this special strong aorist stem, which is, as I say, usually a shorter version of the present stem, but not always. So, for instance, if you wanted to say I was taking, if you wanted the imperfect of lambanor, it would be lambanon. It would have lamban as the stem, whereas labon has this strong aorist stem, that's I took. Okay? So, that's how the strong aorist is formed. Before I show you the strong aorist stems of the other verbs that we already know and love, please do pause the video and note down this information. Okay, so I'm now going to list the verbs that we already know which have strong aorists. The first one is apoteneiskor, which means I die. The strong aorist of that verb is apetanon, and so the strong aorist stem is apotan. This is actually a compound verb, but it's more common than the root verb. The root verb is teneiskor, which also means die. Apoteneiskor is literally like die off, but it's used more commonly than the root verb to die, so that's why we've learned it before learning teneiskor. Anyway, the strong aorist stem of teneiskor is tan, so the strong aorist stem of this compound is apotan. Okay, so you can see that tan is a shorter version of teneisk. So apetanon would be I died. That's the strong aorist form of this verb. Now, all of these, by the way, that I'm putting in this list, except for one of them that I've marked with an asterisk, only have a strong aorist, okay? They use the strong aorist rather than the weak aorist way of forming the aorist. So, apoteneiskor goes to apetanon, ballor goes to eballon. So, ballor is I throw, eballon I threw. Now, you can see the strong aorist stem is bal. We can get the strong aorist stem by dropping the augment and dropping the ending. Estior, I eat, goes to epagon, I ate. The strong aorist stem is therefore pug. That gives us words like anthropophagy, which is the technical term for cannibalism. It comes from anthropos, meaning man or person, and this stem pug, which is the strong aorist stem of the verb to eat. So when you see words with phage in phag, they're about eating, and that's because of this strong aorist stem. Likewise, the strong aorist stem tan gives us the word thanatos, meaning death, which in English would be thanatos. Anyway, heuriskor, the verb to find, goes to heuron. I found. You can see the strong aorist stem is heur, but the augment takes the form of lengthening that diphthong heu to hey, because we can't add epsilon to this. So that rule about what happens with the augment still applies when it comes to these strong aorist stems. Next, we've got echor, which goes to eschon. Lambanor, as we know, goes to elabon. Legor goes to apon. So apon would be I said, or I spoke, or I told. Horaor goes to aidon, so that would be I saw. Oruttor goes to orugon. That's got the stem orug. Now, orugon would therefore mean I dug, since oruttor is the verb to dig. I've put a star here because this verb does also exist in the weak aorist. You can also see this as oruksa instead, which will be the weak aorist form of this verb. So this verb does exist in both the strong aorist, which has the stem orug, and also the weak aorist, which is formed as you would expect it to be. Next we have pinor, the verb to drink. Pinor goes to epion, that will be I drank, so the stem is just pi. Piptor, I fall, goes to epeson, so that will be I fell. Now, the verb piptor isn't one we've actually met in its root form. We've met eis piptor, I fall into, so that will go to eis epeson, that will be I fell into. But I'm now introducing piptor itself. So piptor is the verb to fall. It can also mean I die, in addition to fall. Like we say, 5,000 soldiers fell in the battle, meaning they died in the battle. The Greeks say the same thing. Anyway, piptor goes to epeson. Trechor, I run, goes to edramon. That will be I ran. That's one where the strong aorist stem is very different to the present stem. Pero goes to enenkon or enenka. This is an irregularity here. Now, it's got the strong aorist stem enenk. That goes to enenkon. So that'll be I carried. But this verb does also exist where it uses the strong aorist stem, but the weak aorist endings. Okay, so that's just an irregularity that we have to learn. That it can exist in the strong aorist with the usual strong aorist endings, but it does also exist using its strong aorist stem with the augment, but with the weak aorist endings. A, us, en, amen, ate, un. Finally, peugor, I flee, goes to epugon, so that would be I fled. Now I'll give you some more links to English quickly to help you to remember these strong aorist stems. Heuriscor has the strong aorist stem heur. That gives us the word heuristic in English. A heuristic helps you to find something. Horaor having the strong aorist stem id gives us words like idol. An idol is literally something you see. It comes from the Greek word eidolon, which means an image or an apparition. It can mean ghost. An eidolon is literally something that you see. It's something seen. And that comes from id, the strong aorist stem of horaor, which when augmented goes to aid, and therefore aidon is I saw. Anyway, the id bit gives us the word idol. The strong aorist stem of trechor, drum, I believe, gives us words that have drome at the end. Now there's been a vowel change there, but words that have drome at the end are to do with a racetrack, right? A hippodrome is a horse racing track. And so I imagine, I need to fact check myself on this afterwards, but I imagine we get drome from drum, which is the strong aorist stem of trechor, the verb to run. Okay, so I just checked and I was right, I'm pleased to say, that words like hippodrome come from the strong aorist stem of trechor. There is a noun in ancient Greek, dromos, it's a 2A noun, that means a racetrack, or it can mean running in general as a noun. And that comes from the strong aorist stem of this verb trechor, which is drum. And so ultimately, words that have drome in go back to trechor, or at least its strong aorist stem, drum. Finally, peugor has the strong aorist stem pug. That gives us the word fugitive in English, or at least it's etymologically related to the word fugitive. There's a very similar Latin verb, and the English is probably connected to both of them because I surmise that both of them, both the Latin verb and this one, come from Proto-Indo-European. So there's probably a Proto-Indo-European stem that both the verb to flee in Greek, peugor with the strong aorist stem, pug, and also the verb fugio, the verb to flee in Latin, both come from. Anyway, pug is connected to fugitive, which is similar to how you would transliterate this. You would transliterate this as P-H-U-G. That would sound like fuge, And if you change the PH to an F, you get fuge, as in fugitive. A fugitive is somebody who flees or runs away. They're somebody fleeing imprisonment. Now, with all of that said, please do pause the video and note down these verbs with strong aorists. Okay, here I've got 10 verbs for you in the strong aorist. Please do pause the video and translate them. Okay, to reveal the answers, number 1, pagomen is we ate. Number 2, pien is he, she, it drank. Number 3, pugomen is we fled or we ran away. Number 4, heuron is I or they found. Number 5 is ebales, which would be you singular through. Number 6, edramon would be I or they ran. 7, esketer is you plural had or you plural held. Number 8, nenken would be he, she, it carried or brought or bore. Number 9, eidomen is we saw. And number 10, apetanon is either I or they died. If you have questions about any of these, please do post them in the comments below. Now let's go on to our last exercise for today, which is exercise 4, which consists of 10 English verbs for you to translate into ancient Greek. Now, 9 out of 10 of these verbs will require you to use a strong aorist verb. One of them, however, is also existent in the weak aorist. So, for one of them, you could use either a weak aorist or a strong aorist. With that said, please do pause the video and translate these English verbs into ancient Greek. Okay, to reveal the answers, number 1, we threw would be ebalomen. Number 2, I drank would be epion. He saw would be eiden. You plural took would be elabete. She said would be eipen. You singular fell would be epeses. There's lots of epsilons and sigmas there. Well, there's only 2 sigmas, but it just feels like there's a lot of epsilons and sigmas. Epeses. It's a funny word to say. 7, they dug, is the one that there were 2 options for. We could have said orugon, that's the strong aorist, or we could have said oruxon. This is the only verb we've met so far which exists, or commonly exists, in the strong aorist and the weak aorist. Number 8, he fled, would be epugen. Number 9, we ate, would be epagomen. And number 10, you singular ran, would be edrames. If you have any questions, please do post them in the comments below. But let me finish now by telling you that, as always, there are irregularities. We've seen this with the verb pero. This has a strong aorist stem, namely enenk. So, in the strong aorist, it should be enenkon. But we've learned it can be enenka. It can have the strong aorist stem with the augment, but then with the weak aorist endings. So that's weird. And on top of that, here's another irregularity. The verb airo, which is the verb to lift or raise. What would you expect it to go to in the weak aorist? Well, if you've learned your grammatical rules, you'll know that because the stem ends in rho, we can't add sigma. So all we will do is lengthen the stem if possible, but we can't lengthen the stem because I is already a diphthong. Now, when it comes to the augment, we can't add epsilon, but I did mention that I instead goes to eta with iota subscript. So, altogether then, this should be eira. We should have eta with iota subscript and then alpha as the ending. to mean I lifted or I raised. It's a tricky verb in any case to form the weak aorist of, but instead it's just era. There isn't the iota subscript, so it's not that irregular, it's just lost the iota subscript. Because to augment this verb, we should make I into a, that is eat with iota subscript, but the eta doesn't have the iota subscript for some reason. The iota subscript has gone. How sad. Anyway, if you want to know exactly how irregular verbs look in the aorist, you can find that in the Oxford Grammar of Classical Greek, which I have recommended many times. Okay? You can also find out online on sites like Wiktionary. I know Wiktionary and Wikipedia in general get a bad rap. However, I've used Wiktionary quite a bit, and it is generally reliable for ancient Greek. Generally. There's some things I found to be off, but smaller things. When I have found something to be wrong, it's been a vowel length, for instance, whether the vowel should have a macron above it or not, which is quite a small thing. So, on the whole, it's very reliable for Greek, in my experience. And so if you looked up this verb airo on Wiktionary, if you typed it in using a Greek keyboard, whether that's the one that you can find in the Windows settings, or whether you have Keyman, as I recommend in my video covering books to get if you want to learn ancient Greek, you can use your ancient Greek keyboard to type in airo, and then it will present you with the different forms of airo in the various tenses, and you'll see that the aorist is era. Anyway, with that warning given, I may now wrap up this lesson by summarising our learning for lesson 62. Today we've learned that the aorist indicative active is used for complete actions in the past. It can be translated as I x'd, where X is an action, or the equivalent. Okay, so for instance, I swam for the verb to swim. There are two different ways of forming the aorist. We've learned that there's the weak or the first aorist and the strong or the second aorist. Most verbs form their aorist in the weak aorist manner, but some form it in the strong aorist manner, and a few can do either, like the verb aorito, the verb to dig. The weak or first aorist is formed by taking the present stem, adding sigma, adding the augment, and then using the endings a, us, en, amen, ate, un. The strong or second aorist is formed by taking the strong aorist stem, a special stem, adding the augment, and then using the endings on, es, en, omen, ete, on, same as the imperfect. Moreover, we've learned that most verbs have a weak aorist, but some have a strong aorist, and those that have a strong aorist include apoteneiskor, ballor, estior, heiuriskor, echor, lambanor, legor, horaor, oryctor, pinor, piptor, trechor, peror, and peugor. Now, if one of the verbs we've learned isn't on this list, it's because it has a weak aorist, which should be formed as you would expect it to be given what I've taught you, but there are some irregularities, and we'll learn more about those as we go further on in Greek. And lastly, we've met two new verbs today, namely pempor, the verb to send, and piptor, the verb to fall or die. We had met a compound of piptor before, but not piptor itself. You can see that I've put pes in brackets. That is the strong aorist stem of piptor. And from now on, when we meet a new verb, I shall list the strong aorist stem in brackets if it has a strong aorist. Okay? So you can learn that stem when you learn the verb. Anyway, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching the lesson and for taking all of these notes and for being committed to learning ancient Greek. Keep up the good work, and congratulations if you've reached the end of this long lesson. And if you've gotten to this point in the course as well, well done. Now, I've put an image of some ancient Greek frogs on the screen to brighten your day. I say an image, it's actually two images in a comic strip fashion. You can see in the first one, they're gobbling up some flies. In the second one, they're leaping into a pond. So we might caption this image by saying, Hoi batrachoi das muias pagon, kai peita eisto hudor perdersan. This says, the frogs ate the flies, that's image 1, kai and epeita, then or next. We haven't met that word, but it means then or next. And the next verb we see is perdersan, which is perda'o, the verb to leap, in the weak aorist they form. So, and then they leapt eis into to hudor, the water. The frogs ate the flies and then they leapt into the water, and we see them leaping into the water in this second image. Exciting stuff. And this is the aorist in action, okay? The frogs did one thing successfully and then they did another thing successfully. 2 complete actions in the past. Next time we'll learn about the third kind of aorist called the root aorist. That one is nowhere near as common as the other 2, and it's only used for a few particular verbs, so that's why we're learning about it later on. Anyway, we'll cover that one next time, and then after that, we will do practice with the aorist in Greek sentences. Anyway, keep up the good work, and thank you once again for watching. I shall see you next time.